We are so excited to have Dr. Rich Hanna with us today. Rich is a good bud. We had the opportunity to spend some time in Chicago, and he came and made a visit out here. And then he was our very first ever MC at ProfCon 1, version 1 in 2019 in West Yellowstone, Montana. So very grateful for Rich and all that he's done to partner with StuKent and help us out when he can. To give you a little bit of bio about him, he is a senior lecturer and marketer at Babson College. His areas of expertise include digital marketing, social media, email marketing, research and analytics, and sales. His research has appeared in a variety of scholarly journals. He has co-authored 2 books, Email Marketing in the Digital World, and Internet Marketing, Reaching Customers Anytime, Anywhere, Any Platform. In addition to teaching and research, Dr. Hanna consults in digital marketing, social media, survey design, analysis. Prior to academia, Dr. Hanna worked in marketing research consulting, B2B sales, and marketing communications. Very qualified guy, a very funny guy. We're excited to have you on, Rich, and I will just turn the time over to you to go into your presentation.
Thank you. Boy, I got a lot to live up to now. Well, I wanted to share with you the title of this presentation, Flip Your Digital Marketing Course to HyFlex Online or any modality you need. I'm very passionate about teaching, and I think we've all experienced a pretty rough year and pushed to our teaching limits in terms of what we could do, how we would do it, and having to do it in so many different ways. So really, this presentation is a reflection of some of the things I've learned, and in the process, the way I'm changing my teaching moving forward in the future. So I think to break this up would be start off with a remember when, sort of motivate where we were to get to this point, and then talk about what we mean by flex, what the flex, and then shift to how we learn, because that really matters in how we design our classes. And then I want to remind everybody who we're teaching today, which is the Gen Z population, and they're not your typical students. So that's led me to this conclusion that it's time to flip it, something that I've resisted doing for years, out of fear mostly, but I've embraced it and now I love it. And I'll give you an example through a case study of my own digital marketing class, and I use Mimic Pro in that class, so hopefully that'll help you too. And then close with some final thoughts. So, do you remember when last fall? I feel like it was the journey to Mordor in some ways. So I've pulled my Lord of the Rings picture here. We didn't know whether we'd be teaching fully online, teaching in person, but ultimately we wound up with some kind of hybrid or HyFlex. Depending on the school we were at, it might have been called HyFlex, hybrid. My school called it WebFlex, but learning practitioners have told me that the proper name is HyFlex, where ultimately you are teaching where some of your students are in the classroom and some are virtual. So it looks something like this. What the flex here? So in an ideal world, your students would be socially distanced, and then you'd have several students who are attending the class online. Of course, this would be the ideal. But before we get in, let's just make sure we're all on the same page with the delivery modes. So traditional face-to-face, everybody's in the classroom, we're all together. Virtual asynchronous would be no classroom, everything is delivered asynchronously, so there's no one-on-one interaction. Or virtual synchronous, where there's still no classroom, but content and interactions are delivered online and synchronously via some virtual meeting. If you think about your traditional online class, it's usually a mix of these two. And then we have HyFlex, where we have a classroom, but some students are face-to-face and others are synchronous, virtually synchronous. Of course, the challenge with this is not every classroom is equipped for that kind of thing. So most schools had to equip their classrooms with new classroom technology. The other challenge is that this requires intense bandwidth, both at the school, but also for our students who will be learning online. We as faculty needed to do training to learn how to use this new technology. If you were lucky, you may have had someone who was working the classroom for you. And at my school, they called it a driver. I did not get a driver, unfortunately. So I was doing a lot of stuff on my own, managing WebEx, controlling who was coming into the classroom, looking at the text, the chats, while trying to communicate to my students in the class. It was a real new experience and challenge. And also, in our case at Babson, we couldn't use a whiteboard because then students virtually wouldn't be able to see it. So we needed to actually use a live screen that was in the classroom where we could write using some kind of note software. And that way, students virtually would be able to see, and people in the class would also see the same thing as it projected on the projector. So, of course, most people found this challenging. Even myself, I had a few years of experience teaching fully online courses that had both synchronous and asynchronous content. But for me, this was a true brand new challenge. So, of course, the biggest issue was having an internet connection. And if you had students from all over the world or from different parts of the country, this would be worse for some than others. So also, if your school was anything like mine, about midway through the semester, that full room of socially distanced students became more like an empty room. Because if you're familiar with New England, our weather starts to get pretty bad around November. So it's cold, there's rain, and also with the ups and downs at the time of outbreaks. You never knew, if something was on the rise, we actually closed down for a week, and so that would happen, and that obviously would then scare students. They didn't want to come back. So I had several students who lived in the area but didn't attend class. They decided to attend virtually. And from their perspective, attending a virtual class is not always that pleasant. Whether people are in the classroom or not, the experience of taking that class 100% of the time from your own room is not as pleasant, is not as easy. I mean, I have embraced and loved the work from home aspect. But if you're trying to take your face-to-face class and just teach it virtually, well, that's not going to be a great experience for someone who is in the virtual world. Because really, that face-to-face experience was designed for a face-to-face experience, and it doesn't translate well online. And of course, if people have that internet connection, they're hearing every other word anyways, which means they're going to be pretty well distracted. So, lots of issues. I'll let you read the meme on the left for a moment. So, for many people, we experience technology failures. No matter how much money was spent on the different classrooms, my class tended to have the monitor that showed you who was taking the class virtually was sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. So I couldn't always see who my virtual students were, or I couldn't identify them by voice, or low bandwidth led to disruption in the transmission. And no matter how much training you have, it really takes a village to run a virtual class, a HyFlex class, correctly. I've had friends at some other schools that have the luxury of having someone who is monitoring who's speaking and taking notes, and someone else is controlling the actual technology, and then you're, as the teacher, just delivering your class. And if you have that village, that's fantastic. But most of us don't, which means HyFlex can be very challenging. And like I said a moment ago, the traditional class does not translate to online very well. You have to really think differently in how you're communicating, how you want people to absorb the content, how you're delivering the content, because your audience has different distractions depending on where they are. So as a result, your delivery can be very uneven depending on the context or the place or the mode. And of course, people have screen exhaustion. If this is your third class of the day in a virtual world, you could be exhausted as a student and just not have the energy unless something is different. And so we have to take these things into account when we're designing our classes for the flex environment, or for having flexibility to teach in any environment. And the reality is this new technology, the ability to teach in a flex environment where some of your students are in class and some are virtual, is not going away. For some of us, for some schools, we may still be teaching this fall because not every student can come, especially if you have an international population or someone who has any kind of health concerns. If you're in the New England area, well, snow is something that always occurs in the fall, the winter, and the spring. And so sometimes you need to be able to pivot just because the weather closes things down. Also, if you're teaching graduate students, this whole experience we've had in this last year, this working from home, has actually made online more desirable as people have moved out of the cities or out of not near where they used to work. And so wanting the ability to be able to take their classes online and not in a HyFlex, but just a fully online class matters. And then here's the key thing that I've learned in the last 2 years is that my Gen Z students just aren't the same as the students I've had in the past. They are not the classic student. They've grown up in a different world and have actually different expectations in the classroom. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. So to think about how to design your course so that it can work in any kind of mode, whether you deliver it face-to-face, whether you deliver it in a HyFlex, whether you deliver it in some kind of online, we have to start by thinking about how do people learn? What is that process for learning? And then understand how the different modes affect that. So bring up our information processing map. We sense things. So our first memory is our sensory memory, from touch, from hearing, from seeing, from tasting, though hopefully in class, unless you're in a cooking class, we're not doing that. And then that leads to things that then get placed in our short-term memory. And we might call this our working memory, and it's based on how we process the information. And so we can increase our short-term memory by giving people things in chunks. So if you think about it in paper, we have headers and set up subsections. In a lecture, we might have a title slide and then some information and then another subtitle slide. And then there's an encoding process. The way the short-term memory becomes long-term memory is through some kind of depth of processing and then over time. And so there's different types of long-term memory. There's personal experiences that we remember. There's facts that somehow remember, and there's procedures that we remember, processes, things that are repetitive. And so some people actually have better ability at episodic memory, and others have better semantic, and others have better procedural, and some people can do all three. But we can improve all three through the time and the motivation we have to processing. So let's think about now what can influence these things. So for example, the extent to which we're paying attention or our level of perception of content is going to affect how we absorb the sensory memory that we get. If we weren't paying attention for a few moments, we might have missed hearing something very important. Or if we were distracted, we weren't paying attention, we didn't see the particular screen that we needed. Then there's distraction. So of course with distraction, this can come in a variety of forms. There's a loud noise in class. If we're talking about a face-to-face environment, it could be noises outside the classroom. Perhaps it's the landscapers lawn mowing the grounds outside your building. Or it could be heat. The classes could be too hot or too cold. And at home, the distractions are numerous. We have other things that we could be doing. And especially if there's an internet bandwidth issue, we could easily say, well, I can't hear this, so I'm going to try something else, or I'm going to multitask. Now, people do multitask in the classroom too, but it's a little harder to really get it done without getting caught, whereas at home, there is nothing that will catch you from multitasking. And then in terms of making short-term memories into long-term memories, it comes down to motivation. And there's lots of things that can affect motivation. The ability to have milestones, or the feeling like you can succeed versus not. And so if there are things that can hurt motivation, definitely there are things that will stop us from wanting to learn. And that's often the challenge with self-paced at-home learning, is people lack the motivation. Whereas in the classroom, there's a little bit more motivation. And also we can get around this through having deliverables. So, if we think about the different modes we talked about, and face-to-face, obviously paying attention is key, and that's a challenge no matter what. There's also a safety issue, whether we feel safe in the classroom. And safety is not just simply from a health perspective in terms of now this COVID era that we live in, but safety can be also be a diversity and inclusion aspect where I feel safe in the environment that I'm learning in. And then your ability to process. Not all of us process information as quickly or in the same way. But when we're hearing it in a live face-to-face environment, you get one shot to hear it and understand it. Now in a virtual environment, there's definitely more distractions because we're distracted by wherever we're actually taking this class. And then there's technology issues that can be a challenge. And then the low motivation and low sensory stimulation. When you're in a classroom, you're hearing and seeing, and you're in a different environment that all is affecting your senses. When you're home and alone, well, that's not as stimulated. Then the HyFlex environment is a challenge because you have both the face-to-face and the virtual challenges, depending on what mode your students are in. And then you add to that the instructor's attention is diverted. And then you have to manipulate technology. Technology may fail, which creates tension and stress. Other distractions, and then again, the ability to process is going to vary. And then let's add one more thing to this. And this is something I've learned in the last few years, that Gen Z are truly not like us. Now, if you're wondering, I'm a Gen Xer, so child of the 70s and 80s, very different learning, but I have a lot of things that I can relate to Gen Z. I kind of almost think I'm a Gen Z wannabe in the sense that what do Gen Z students want? They want autonomous learning. I love that. They want it to be self-paced and self-directed, so they want control over their learning. They want the freedom to learn their way, meaning through different means. And they want it to be personal. They want to know why should they care. Another thing to know about Gen Z students is that they are tech natives. They were born with the iPhone, with the iPad, with all sorts of video. They are YouTube. They get most of their content through YouTube. So they were born with YouTube. They're looking for milestones. And so that's the key. If you think about who we're teaching to today and the challenge of the mode and keeping everybody into attention, our traditional face-to-face process doesn't work as effectively as we would like it to work. So what we really need to think about is changing that so that not only it allows us to teach in different environments in any mode whenever we need to pivot, as well as to keep our younger students, this Gen Z student population, engaged. And so one of the ways that is very effective at doing this is taking on the flipped classroom. Now, a flipped classroom is not new, so I'm not going to teach you anything you don't already know, but I hopefully will provide you an example of how I've modified the flipped classroom to an online environment. But if we think about what is a flipped classroom in the first place, so you have your class, the traditional class, the face-to-face classes, teachers at the front of the room teaching, and then you give homework and the student goes home and practices at home. But in a flipped classroom, you move the lecture to at home through a computer. And then when students come to class, you do something interactive. There's some kind of activity or assignment. So that is the basis of a flipped classroom. Now you might be saying, but how do you do this with a flex? Well, you can. Let me show you. We need to think about flipping our classroom in a manner that's very much like creating a fully online asynchronous class. The secret to doing it is to chunk your content in smaller pieces. If you're looking for examples, check out HubSpot or check out any of the online certifications where each of the topics are broken down into 5-minute videos, 8-minute videos, 9-minute videos. And so the goal is to chunk your content and then create pre-recorded videos that people can watch. And then you want to create an interactive activity that supports that content, that helps the learning or processing of that content. And then you need to organize it as if you were fully online. And then you can adjust it to, well, this is going to be a face-to-face class and this is going to be an online class. Let me show you. So in my digital marketing class, give you some background. I use Mimic Pro in that class. It's supposed to be meeting 2 times per week for 90 minutes. And in this last year, it's been in a HyFlex where the expectation is that I would be in the classroom teaching, and my students would either be with me, and half virtually. The semester is 14 weeks, and the challenge is I have students from all over the world with questionable internet and different time zones. So you can imagine how easy is it for a student to have full attention and process if it's 2 in the morning for them, but 9 in the morning for me. I may be alive, happy, and I may have a lot of energy going into that class because it's morning time and I'm jacked up on my coffee, but the student who's at 2 in the morning, they're holding off from going to bed. Or another student who might have questionable internet and they're hearing every other word that I say. And even my students in class who are distracted by my distractions of having to teach to 2 different groups at the same time. So here's what I did for my design. Every week, my first class wasn't a class. I chunked what I would have done in lectures and created 3 to 4 15-minute pre-recorded lectures. And so what would have been section breaks in my PowerPoint became natural breaks for the video. So an 8-minute video here, a 12-minute video here, maybe 20 minutes. You never really want to go beyond 20 minutes. That's long for a self-paced video. I also would have a multiple choice quiz that would go along with the set of videos. That's really just to keep everybody honest. I'm less worried about looking probably at more multiple choice questions because I want to make sure that students have gone through the content. And it's not really about application. Then the second class is an interactive class. And this is where I'll use a case study, a website assessment, maybe a Kahoot, or I'll introduce Mimic Pro and we'll use Mimic Pro in the classroom. Or students would be doing presentations. Now the key to this, to being flexible, is that these are designed so that I can do this face-to-face. They're meant to merge students whether they're online or face-to-face, together or not together. Or I could do this completely from my home office and do it virtually. The beauty of this is that at any point I can pivot. In an ideal world, class 2 would be face-to-face with 100% attendance. In a less than ideal world, I've got half the students there and half the students online. And, I would consider an ideal world too is everybody's online together, so we're experiencing it in the same way. But there's motivation in this class too, because it's an interactive, because we're doing something, there's less chance for distraction. The students and I are always on the move doing something. And so that home office or that home couch you might be sitting on, you have to be doing something with your classmates so you can't get distracted by some other activity. But the beauty of class 1, which is not really a face-to-face class, it's now all virtual and the students take the lectures on their own, is that the students control the pace and how they learn. So someone who needs to hear something twice can replay the video. Someone who wants to go quickly can play it at double speed. Someone who needs to maybe listen to it twice and process differently, they have the flexibility to do that. And again, the beauty of all of this is that I can deliver the same exact class, the same syllabus, in all 3 formats: face-to-face, virtual online, or HyFlex. And of course, in terms of deliverables, what am I going to grade people on? Well, it's the multiple choice quizzes. There's 1 grade, but I'll weight that accordingly because that's really a test of memory and that people went through the process. The case studies and the website assessment, I'll put a little more weight in because that's an application. And of course, the Mimic Performance, which is fantastic because you have your scoring inside the game so you can see exactly how people are performing and you have an objective grade from that. And then overall engagement. Are people attending peer evaluations? Do students say they're teammates when they worked virtually or online? Do they actually participate and contribute? That would be the last part. So the benefits of this is that technology never got in the way of learning. And students couldn't complain that they missed some key piece of content or learning because the internet went out, because all of the lectures were online, so they could watch it, they could download it, so they could see it and manage the pace, and they didn't have to worry about having an internet connection. Students were more engaged with the interactives because they were fun, they were applications, so they got a chance to practice. So in a sense, we were triggering that episodic memory for information processing. So what they did live was a personal experience and was more memorable as a result than, say, if I just explained it to them or I gave them an exam. And then students ultimately preferred the videos. They liked the self-paced nature and the interactives combined. Now, this wasn't easy. You need to have those quizzes to keep them honest. You have to chunk things. You have to find the nice logical breaks in your content. And you need to have good activities. Otherwise, this could all go bust. And I have to tell you that Mimic Pro, and I've done this now in my social media and advertising class with Mimic Social, is huge because it acts as a capstone activity. And it's a great thing that we can do both face-to-face or virtually or in some combined aspect. So it lends itself to this kind of environment. So some final thoughts, and I'll take some questions. This is a continuous learning process. It's not easy to do, and it's something that you have to continually work on. But I'll tell you, it is absolutely worth it. Several students have emailed telling me, and have also told me in person, that this was the best course that they had had. They love the content, which digital marketing, who doesn't love that? But they love the mode in which it was delivered, that they could control the way they learned the content from the video lectures, and then they had something interactive in the classroom. And so ultimately, you have to experiment. That's the only way, and don't expect it to be perfect the first time. Now, if you're looking for some resources to help you, these were two books that I found really, really helpful in my understanding of both how people learn and how to translate this into teaching, teaching online. One of the most important things, and that's especially made clear in the effective online teaching, is how important it is to be organized. And this supports the process of how we learn. The more organized we are, that the students can see how things fit and scaffold on top of each other, the easier it is their ability to actually absorb it, learn it, and keep it forever. And something we know that most people forget things after a course is over, but if we provide a good organizational structure, it makes that a lot easier to retain information that you've learned. And I found these two books extremely helpful in that process. All right, well, thank you. I'll turn it over to questions.
Awesome. We got a lot of great questions here. The first one that I want to approach is, what about that Monday, Wednesday, Friday teaching schedule? Have you had experience with that, or do you have any suggestions on how someone could tackle that?
So I haven't had any experience with the Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but I probably would try to break it up into similar. The first class is though given it's Monday, I might do an interactive on Monday, and then have some video content for them to watch on Wednesday, and then another interactive on Friday. The goal, what I did do is I did this for both my undergrad and graduate class. My graduate class meets once per week for 3 hours. And I knew that was just not, having people online for 3 hours was definitely not something I think they would enjoy, and I knew I wouldn't enjoy it either. So I broke that up where I took half the content and said, you're going to watch this online at the beginning of the week, and then had an interactive, and it had only a 75-minute or 80-minute class instead of a 3-hour class where we did the interactive. So it's really all about redistributing how you think about it. Another way to think about it would be, if you just laid out in a given week, what is the different work that you want people to do, and then you assign it to the different days, and whether it be virtual or face-to-face, really will be a function of the difficulty of the material and the structure of the course.
Awesome. You may mention a lot about the quizzes, keeping your students honest. Just some questions about the timing of that. You had the quiz on your Monday class. Have you considered doing that on the Thursday class, pre-class, so that they have that time to work on it? Any thoughts on strategically why you chose to quiz when you did?
So you can do it any way you want. I'm still experimenting with this. What I find is that the students complained if they couldn't take the quiz soon after going through the material. Now keep in mind that when I say the first class, in theory, since I'm not monitoring them, they I'm not with them while they're watching these videos. So I'm canceling that class. I'm not canceling it, but they're responsible for watching those videos during that time, but they could also choose to watch them at a different time. So they don't necessarily have to be, watching those videos during that first class time. It's just that I'm assuming that the 90 minutes that would have been dedicated to class is their 90 minutes to watch those videos at whatever point in time they want. And the students want to be able to take the quiz right after watching the videos because they have it in their active short-term memory. Whereas they find it more difficult to take the multiple choice questions if there's space in between watching the videos and then taking the quiz. The short-term memory is gone. And this is really these multiple choice questions are really getting at short-term memory in terms of reading and going through the content. But you could essentially require people to watch your lectures at the beginning of the week and have the quiz available up until the interactive class. So you don't need to do it immediately after. You can have flexibility there. I just know from experience that students want to be able to take it quickly after watching the videos.
Awesome. You had mentioned at Babson, they have those drivers. I assume it's a part of like the tech department or IT or whatever. Any suggestions on to eliminate the technology issues? What do you guys do to kind of get ahead of the game as far as equipment goes?
So it's not easy. I say, like, I know I visited a school. I won't name the school, but they had multiple people running a classroom, which is that would have been awesome. I ran my classroom without any assistance. So the challenge is really making sure that you've thought through your script for that class. What are you going to do? And almost like reminding yourself to drink water. You have to remind yourself if you're going to do some kind of lecture, you're going to remind yourself that, all right, it's a 3-minute mark. I need to stop to ask for questions. And then look at the chat. Another thing that I know some of my colleagues did was they would ask one student in the classroom and give them a participation score by asking them to monitor the chat. And then if you don't have a driver, if you don't have someone who can help with the technology, you can employ your students and rotate who has responsibility for each class and give them the opportunity to get extra participation, and at the same time they help you by monitoring the chat, much like Kelton, you're monitoring the chat for me and putting the questions out there.
Awesome. I'm gonna kind of show my transparency here. I don't know what this means, so hopefully you do. What are you doing about differentiation and students with IEPs or 504s?
So I don't know what those two are.
Okay, good. It's not just me.
No, but
okay, Richard, I asked the question.
Okay.
Yeah.
I teach high school.
Okay.
So we have students that have IEPs, individual learning plans, and kids with 504s that need extended time.
Yep.
Just another way to differentiate to help with their disabilities.
Sure. So a lot of it depends on the learning management system you're using. So I'm assuming you're probably using Google Classroom, or do you have
Canvas?
Canvas.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so in Canvas, we're using Canvas too. So for quizzes, the students who have extra time, since the quizzes are short, typically I just need to give them extra time as opposed to giving them a break. If it was an exam, I'd have to build in a break time. But for the quizzes, generally I just need to extend time for the different students. So in Canvas, if you can actually by student increase the amount of time they have for the quizzes, and that generally addresses the extra time. As far as an individual learning plan, that's something I'd probably have to think through. I don't know how to address that one off the cuff, but I would probably just think about providing some extra materials to help assist with how they manage the content.
So additional videos you would create then, or?
Yeah, or maybe even like a what do I call, like a to-do list, a sheet.
Okay,
So,
that would guide them through it. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, one of the things
Okay.
I do in Canvas is, actually, if you guys have a minute, I can show you my one of the things I try to do in Canvas is set up learning objectives for the week, and then give them links to all the different things that they have to do for that week, so that everybody knows what they're doing. And if you guys give me 1 second, I'll pull it up. Or if you want to ask another question, here.
Yeah, I guess I could make a comment. I just thought that this was really interesting as you're going through your presentation. I've been here at Stu Camp for 4 years. I'm a part of the millennial generation. And when I first joined Stu Camp, it seemed like all of these presentations were about how millennials are a tough group to teach. And now as we transition to Gen Z and new challenges that happen, I just think it's interesting that digital native, that was kind of with my generation. I grew up with internet, although it being dial-up. Now Gen Z having 5G super fast, growing up with all of the technologies that they have. I think what it's done is, just from a generational perspective, is we're very impatient when it comes to technology. And so you can instantly sense that frustration from your students, probably when it takes more than 10 seconds to log into the Zoom meeting. So I think as educators, one thing that you can definitely do to kind of put your students at ease a little bit is, we're all learning. This is a weird thing for all of us to be doing virtual teaching, and there are just things you can't control. This morning for ProfCon, there was a broken link for Stu session, and I was running around like a chicken with my head cut off. But luckily, y'all stayed and worked with us to make sure that we overcome some of these challenges. And I think that your generation, teacher generation, you guys have a little bit more compassion and understanding for those things. But as the younger generation, it's now or never. It's got to happen. So I think that that's a part of the educational soft skills, is just to say, be patient with us as we try to get it figured out, because there's just some things you can't control. If internet goes out, you guys give that grace to your students when they come back to you and say, I couldn't turn it in because my internet was out at my home. In turn, you should get that same respect back when things don't go perfectly as planned in the classroom. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's funny. I wish I had adapted sooner, because I think even millennials would have preferred the flipped classroom. But I think for me, it was still that transition of not feeling that was the right way for learning. But I had to say I've adapted. But I don't know if this helps. When I set up my Canvas, every module begins with objectives for the week, where I'll say what we're going to learn this week, and then I have the specific links to the things that they need to do. So for this particular week, it was complete the readings, and so if they click on that, it goes right to the readings that they can get. They could hit next and get to the videos, but if they went back to the modules, they would also see it. If they came back at a later time, they could click it from here. And in terms of
That's so awesome. That's so awesome, Richard, but it's painstaking setting up all of this stuff,
Oh, no. Believe me, I agree. But one of those things I'll say is that once you set it up, and you really don't need to change it.
Yeah, once you set it up, then they tell you to teach another class. So
that's the challenge in high school versus college. It's like, I know I own this class, so I know I'm going to be teaching it for a while. So like this course has, for me, been copied over now 3 or 4 times, and I'll update 1 or 2 of the videos. But this is what I mean by chunking the videos. These videos are not more than 7 minutes long, and so they go through them quickly.
Do you record your face-to-face class as well?
Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't, but I had to for HyFlex, and so I don't mind. I mean, I know some people do have concerns about that, and sometimes you hear the comment like a student may want to talk about a business idea and they don't want it recorded for other people to then come back to. So there's definitely challenges around privacy and issues around recording of the live class. I would honestly, if to be quite honest, in a HyFlex situation, I think if you allow the recording to exist, then no one's motivated to come when you're actually doing the live class. But really, it comes down to what it is you want to achieve and what your school requires too. I know one of
That's good advice.
one challenge. I don't know if there's another question, but as we move into the fall, is we know we need to offer a flex for some students, but we're expecting 90% of the population to be back on campus and to be able to go to the classroom. But if we're offering the flex, what's my motivation to go to class if I've, had a long weekend, or it's raining, or it's, it'll tend to be in New England, cold. So we need to have a reason why they need to come to class. And so this is one of the things we're working on as a faculty this summer is how do we ensure that people come to class and not be able just to flip modes? You got to commit to one or the other.
Awesome. You just got a question in. If you're grading class, oops, sorry, my chat's moving all over on me. If you're grading class participation and someone has to miss the class meeting, how do you adjust their grade, or do you give them an alternative assignment?
So I typically it's like an attendance, so their their participation in a class is they've missed it. So I don't usually give them a makeup unless it's, that's my personal policy is if you miss a class, you miss participation. That's what I would do in face-to-face. And so it hasn't really changed in an online. But it really depends. Like I'm probably a lot stricter about this with my undergraduates than I am with my grad students. But if it's an interactive where they're working in their teams, I mean, they're really letting down their team if they miss. But with the number of classes we have, missing, a couple of classes is not a big deal. And I'm famous for basically telling my students, and also this is why I'm a little bit more harsh about this, is that at the start of the semester, I'll always tell my students that in life, if you get a job, you generally start out with a 2-week vacation. And if you're lucky, if you're management, you get a 4-week vacation. And so if you take the proportion of weeks, and if you take the number of weeks in the year and take 2 weeks and 4 weeks out of the number of weeks in the total year, you wind up with the same proportion as missing one class or missing 2 classes in a 14-week period. The proportions are almost exactly the same. You can do the math. So I'll say to students, so I'll treat you like you've been working for a while. Everybody gets the equivalent of a 4-week vacation. You can miss up to 2 classes, and I won't count it against your participation or engagement. But once you go past 2, now it directly affects. So that's how I justify saying you miss a class, you miss it, and I don't give a makeup for it.
I love that definition. Usually what it's been in my college career, it was, okay, you can miss 2 classes and that's it. But I've never heard that breakdown of the real world. So I want them
to know that, getting that 2 classes is like being treated like, a person with experience in the workplace. At least if you're in the US. I don't know about in other countries what the vacation schedules are like, but certainly I don't, in sales, I never had a vacation. You missed work, you missed selling. Mm-hmm. But I know from my colleagues and my wife, the amount of vacation time you fight for.
That's awesome. Unlimited PTO here at StuKent, so I guess I could just take your class off. Just kidding. All right. Hey, I think that's it as far as our time goes. This was great, Rich. I think a lot of people are gleaning a lot from this presentation as we're trying to figure it out. But I think a key in all of this is just experimentation. You've done a lot of variations of this to come out with your end results. So hopefully this gives people a good foundation to start off from.
I love talking about it. So anyone feel free to reach out. Happy to discuss it.
Awesome. All right, everybody, this ends day 1 of ProfCon. We will see you tomorrow. I did see a lot of people in the chat about Rich's resources wanting to do a giveaway. I'll go back to our CMO and I'll say I need some budget for a giveaway tomorrow. We'll see if we can give away some of those books. So I'll let you know. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you tomorrow.
It doesn't hurt to beg every once in a while.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Richard.
You're welcome.